Your grown child calls. They tell you about the weather. The traffic was bad. They had soup for lunch. And then they hang up without ever saying the one thing that kept them awake at 3 in the morning. You felt it. You just couldn't name it. This is not because they stopped loving you. It is because somewhere along the way, telling you, stop feeling safe or stop feeling worth it. I am 98 years old, and I want to be honest with you. There really is a this in that title, but it is far smaller and more ordinary than you expect. It is not a grand heart-to-heart. It is a habit. And here is the strange part. Whether your child volunteers the next hard thing has almost nothing to do with the words you choose. The biggest tell isn't even how you handle their worst news. Let me tell you about a study that changed how I think about this. In 1998, 3 researchers, Lorenzo Barrett and Pietro Monaco, asked people to keep a diary. Every meaningful conversation, written down right after it happened, for 2 weeks. They wanted to know what actually builds closeness. Here is what they found. Telling someone something personal did not, by itself, build intimacy. It built intimacy only when the person felt understood, valued, and cared for in return. They called that perceived responsiveness. The disclosure is the knock. The responsiveness is whether the door opens, and then a sharper finding, the kind most people miss. Sharing facts barely moved the needle. Sharing feelings did, but only the feelings that were met with safety. Facts don't open the door. Feelings tested for safety do. So here is the part that matters most. Whether your child confides in you tomorrow depends less on what you say tonight and more on how the last vulnerable thing they told you landed. Every reaction you give is a tiny deposit or a tiny withdrawal in your reputation as someone safe to tell things to. Responsiveness opens the faucet. The feeling of not being heard closes it. And this is not soft talk. We can see it in the brain. In 2014, Morelli, Torre, and Eisenberger put people inside a scanner and watched what happened when they felt understood and when they did not. Feeling understood lit up the reward regions, the ventral striatum, the middle insula, the same circuitry that responds to things we want. Feeling not understood lit up a different place, the anterior insula, the part that handles threat and pain. Read that again. When you brush off what your child just told you, it is not neutral to them. It registers in the same system as a threat. So when someone says, "I just want to feel heard," that is not a complaint. It is a fact about how they are wired. There is more. Schenck and Frizzetti in 2011 measured what happens to the body during invalidation. Their heart rate climbed. Their palms went damp. They grew more reactive afterward. Invalidation does not just sting. It dysregulates, and it shuts the next disclosure down. So here is the move, and it costs you nothing. The goal of a hard conversation is not to solve it. Reflect the feeling back first. That sounds exhausting. Say that before you reach for advice, because reaching to fix it reads as, "I am solving you," not, "I am seeing you." Now, back to that biggest tell, the one that isn't about their worst news. Here is the finding that surprised me most, because it turns the usual advice on its head. We are all told to be there in the hard times. That is true, but it is incomplete. In 2006, Gable, Gonzaga, and Strachman followed 79 couples. They found that how a person responded to their partner's good news predicted whether they were still together 2 months later better than how they handled the bad news. Sit with that. The good news mattered more than the bad. Gable had earlier named 4 ways people greet good news. Only one builds the bond, the genuine, curious, delighted one. The mild, "That's nice," The deflating, well, don't get ahead of yourself. The distracted half listen. All three quietly wear the relationship down. Here is how it goes wrong at the kitchen table. Your child tells you about a small win, a job, a date, a project they finally finished. And you say, "Don't count your chickens," or you top it with a story of your own. That one flat reply teaches them not to bring you the good things either. Now, honest with you, this was measured in couples, not in parents and grown children. We are extending it by reason, not by proof. But it costs nothing, and it points the same way every time. Light up first. Advise never. Here. There is one sentence that closes the door more quietly than any other. After all I did for you. Margaret Clark and Judson Mills spent years studying two kinds of relationships. Exchange relationships where benefits are tallied and repaid, like a business, and communal relationships where you give from care, no ledger, no receipt. And here's what they found. People who wanted a close bond actively avoided keeping score. There is a stranger detail still. In their work, promptly repaying a gift could actually reduce how much people liked each other, because repayment turns a gift into a transaction. The moment you reach for the receipt, the relationship is silently repriced. And guilt does work. That is exactly why we use it. Asor, Roth, and Deasy in 2004 studied what they called conditional regard, warmth handed out for good behavior, withdrawn for disappointment. It changes behavior, yes, but it buys resentment and an "I have to" feeling, the precise opposite of someone wanting to confide in you. So here is the swap, and nearly every parent has needed it. Trade the guilt call for the open invitation. No pressure. I would just love to see you when it works for you. That hands control back to them, and it keeps the door open. That sentence rarely travels alone. If you have felt that quiet pushing away, my talk on where to start when you're lonely, after 60 walks through the small habits behind it. Most people think the danger is the topic. Politics, money. Avoid those, they say, and you'll be fine. The research says otherwise. Burdett, Miller, Fingerman, and Lefkowitz studied 158 families. They separated two kinds of tension. Tension about an issue, the child's job, their money, their habits, and tension about the relationship itself, feeling criticized, getting unwanted advice, feeling judged for who you are. The second kind damaged closeness far more. And here is the part I find so honest. In that same study, parents mostly blamed the child's habits and lifestyle. The children mostly blamed the parents' way of communicating. The two generations point at different culprits. So just avoid politics and money. Misses the real fault line. A second strain hides inside plain warmth. Suter and her colleagues found that even the favored child, the one a mother felt closest to, carried more signs of depression, sharpest for daughters of widowed mothers pulled in as the sole caregiver. And perceived favoritism eroded closeness among all the siblings, no matter who was chosen. Leaning on your closest child has a hidden cost. Spread your warmth evenly, and ask rather than assume. One more. Fitzsimons and Lehman showed that unsolicited advice, the kind that cuts against what someone already leans toward, makes them move against it, just to keep their freedom. Your good advice can push them the wrong way. So ask before you advise. Do you want my thoughts, or do you just need me to hear this? And keep any disagreement on the behavior. Never let it harden into a verdict on who they are. Now, let me ease a particular ache. Many parents feel a quiet distance from a child and read it as coldness. It usually isn't. In 1971, Bengtson and Kuipers named something they called the developmental stake. Across generations, Parents reliably rate the bond as closer and more important than their grown children rate the very same bond. And when Gia Russo and her colleagues looked at the same families 20 years later, the gap was still there. This is freeing if you let it be. The distance you feel is usually not your child going cold. It is the ordinary asymmetry of the one who cares more. Your felt closeness is weak evidence of theirs. That calls for humility, not panic. And it has a consequence. Because the bigger stake is yours, the initiating is usually yours too. The first move, the first text, the first reach, most of the time, that falls to the parent. That is not unfair. It is just the arithmetic of love. And that pull to reach first only grows stronger as you age. Most people misread the reason for it. They call it neediness. It is very nearly the opposite. Feeling far while sitting close is its own kind of loneliness, and the body treats that distance as a real wound. That is exactly why I made the talk on loneliness being deadlier than smoking. So let me answer that. Why does the reach grow stronger with age, and why is it not neediness? Think back to the weather call. When a parent's world narrows to the weather and the traffic, it is not only the child holding back. The parent's own circle is quietly shrinking too. Laura Carson calls it socio-emotional selectivity. As time starts to feel finite, and age makes it feel finite, people do not get needier. They get deliberate. They prune the wide network of acquaintances and pour themselves into the few who truly matter. Lang and Carson put numbers to it in 1994. In advanced stage, the total social network shrinks to roughly half its earlier size, but the number of very close relationships stays essentially unchanged. You let go of the many, you keep the few, so your grown child is not in your life by accident. They sit inside that small, chosen, late-life circle by design. That is exactly why one warm overture from you lands so heavily. And the reach you felt growing a moment ago is not neediness at all. I have watched this pattern for the better part of a century. Wanting them close is not weakness. It is the most rational thing a finite life can do. Now, some of you are listening with a silence in your family that has already grown long. Let me speak to you directly, and let me take the shame off the table first. Carl Pillemer at Cornell surveyed Americans and found that about 27%, roughly 67 million people, are currently estranged from a relative. You are not a rare failure. You are in very common, very human company. And here is the genuinely hopeful number, the one almost no one knows. Retschek, Stacy, and Tomer in 2023 followed estrangements over time. About 81% of estrangements from mothers and 69% from fathers later reversed. Reconciliation is, statistically, the more common ending. The silence is usually a chapter, not the last page. Kylie Aglia studied how these ruptures actually form. They are rarely one dramatic explosion. They are a slow erosion with a small final straw at the end. And that matters because it means the repair is also slow and relational, not one grand apology that fixes everything. Pillemer's reconcilers showed the way. They dropped the demand for an apology. They accepted the other person as they are. And they could see their own part in it. You do not have to win the old argument. You only have to let go of needing to win it. So let me gather all of this into one quiet truth. You do not have to fix your children. You do not have to win the old arguments. You do not have to extract an apology. You only have to become the person who is safe to tell things to. It is a handful of small, repeatable motions. Greet their good news with real delight. Meet their hard news with, "Tell me more." Before, "Here's what you should do." Invite them without a bill attached. And where there has been a rift, be the one who reaches first. None of this is guaranteed. Some of it is still being studied. But the door the research describes opens far more often than the silence would have you believe. And the first move is usually yours to make. Late is not the same as finished. So subscribe if you'd like to keep thinking through these things with me. And in the comments, tell me the one small reach you will try this week. If this changed how you see closeness, watch for the same quiet withdrawal in a marriage, where love so often ends not in a fight, but in the silence we mistake for peace.